Trump's masterstroke hit Europe at its most sensitive points: soldiers, energy, and money. This Thursday, May 7, 2026. The crisis escalated after Washington moved forward with the withdrawal of at least 5,000 American troops from Germany. Meanwhile, Italy and Spain came under scrutiny for refusing to give firm support to operations related to Iran and the Strait of Hormuz. The pressure did not come in the form of empty rhetoric. It came in the form of troops leaving, bases being threatened, the local economy shaking, and European governments scrambling to put out a diplomatic fire. Germany, already hampered by years of economic weakness, now sees entire cities fearing the loss of income, jobs, and the American military presence. Italy, led by Giorgia Meloni, is trying to prevent the punishment from reaching its territory. And Spain, under Pedro Sanchez, has become a symbol of Europe, which wants American protection but takes a step back when a partner asks for help. The move started with the dispute over security in the Gulf. I'll tell you all about it in a moment, but now you'll want to subscribe to the channel to stay well informed. Real-time information with the highest journalistic quality you've ever seen, the Milson Alves standard of credibility. With the conflict in the Middle East putting pressure on oil, gas, and maritime routes, Trump demanded that NATO allies help protect passage through the Strait of Hormuz. The demand had a simple logic. If Europe depends on energy that passes through critical areas, it also needs to take on the cost, risk, and responsibility. But when the response was weak, Washington changed its tone. Germany criticized the American strategy. On Iran, Italy tried to strike a balance between Trump, the Vatican, Israel, and its own public opinion. Spain had already refused the use of bases for related missions. The result was immediate. Trump began to treat the American military presence in Europe as a bargaining chip, not as an automatic obligation. In Germany, the planned withdrawal affects a symbol of the American presence since the Cold War. Vilseck in Bavaria is home to Rose Barracks and the 2nd Stryker Cavalry, one of the most important American military structures on German soil. For Washington, withdrawing soldiers from the city is an economic blow. Commerce, rent, restaurants, services, civilian jobs, and local revenue all depend on the presence of American military personnel and their families. Reuters showed that residents and local authorities fear a deep impact if the withdrawal is confirmed. It's not just about defense, it's about salaries, consumption, and taxes. With the uniforms leaving, the pressure grows even heavier because Germany was already struggling. The largest European economy shrank by 0.2% in 2024, marking the 2nd consecutive annual decline. This exposed the loss of industrial strength, expensive energy, and dependence on exports. In 2026, German economic institutes cut the growth forecast to 0.6% and the expectation for 2027 dropped to 0.4%. In other words, Trump chose a moment when Berlin has no room to maneuver. The German government may complain about American pressure, but the reality is harsh. The economy is struggling, the industry is under pressure, and the loss of American bases threatens communities that have gotten used to living under the US military umbrella. Italy is on alert. Taking a different approach, Giorgia Meloni tried to show some distance from Trump on sensitive issues, especially after the crisis with the Vatican. Conflict in Iran and the suspension of the Defense Cooperation Agreement with Israel. But when Trump suggested that he might withdraw American troops from Italy and Spain as well, Rome changed its tone. Meloni stated that she would not support an American withdrawal and scheduled a meeting with Marco Rubio. During the Secretary of State's visit to Rome, the message was clear. The Italian Prime Minister knows that confronting Trump might earn her some applause at home, but only for a few hours. But losing the protection and military presence of the US comes at a much higher price. Meloni's political situation also became more difficult after the defeat in the referendum on judicial reform in March 2026. Italian voters rejected the proposal, which was backed by the government, in a defeat seen as a major political blow. For the Prime Minister, the reform was intended to change aspects of the judiciary's structure, but the rejection gave new momentum to the opposition. And it showed that Meloni is no longer moving through Europe as an untouchable leader. Now, with Trump threatening to change the American military presence, she faces pressure on two fronts. Inside Italy, where she needs to show independence, and outside, where she needs to convince Washington that Rome is still a reliable ally. Spain became another target because it had already refused the use of bases for operations related to Iran. In March, Trump threatened to cut trade with Madrid after the Spanish government denied military access for American missions. Now, with the withdrawal of troops from Germany and the threat against Italy and Spain, Sanchez appears as an example of an ally who accepts the American shield but resists when the political cost increases. Spain hosts thousands of American military personnel and strategic bases in the south, especially in Rota and Moron. Even without a final decision, the possibility of cuts is already causing fear in regions that depend on contracts, jobs, and economic activity linked to the United States military structure. The numbers help explain why the move is so alarming. Data cited by Reuters shows that in December 2025, the United States had about 68,000 military personnel stationed at permanent bases. In Europe, Germany had 36,436 military personnel, Italy had 12,662, and Spain had 3,814. NATO had already noticed this shift in 2025 when the Allies agreed to increase their defense investment commitment to 5% of GDP by 2035. The official statement from the Hague summit established that 3.5% would be allocated to core defense requirements and 1.5% to areas related to security, such as infrastructure and the defense industry. This agreement was presented as a historic breakthrough, but for Trump, a distant promise does not replace immediate action. When the war in Iran put pressure on routes, energy, and trade, he used the crisis to test who would really stand with Washington, a risky moment. The energy impact also becomes central to the crisis. With the conflict in the Middle East driving up oil and gas costs, European companies and governments began to feel fresh pressure on inflation, industry, and transportation. Reuters reported that Lanxess, the German chemical giant, is planning for oil prices between $100 and $110 per barrel in the coming months. Because of the tensions in the Middle East, this factor weighs directly on Germany, which has already lost competitiveness due to expensive energy since the breakdown of the old model, which was based on cheap Russian gas. For Trump, this is the perfect pressure point. Europe needs the route, needs the energy, needs the protection, but doesn't want to pay the political price for security. And NATO is faced with an uncomfortable question. What happens when the main financier of Western security decides to demand loyalty in public and punish those who don't deliver? This dispute didn't start now. In March 2016, Trump was already saying that NATO was economically unfair to the United States and that Washington was paying a disproportionate share of European defense. Before him, Dwight Eisenhower had already warned European allies in 1953 that the American well could run dry, arguing that Europe should take on more responsibility for its own defense. The difference is that Trump turned an old complaint into a mechanism of direct pressure. History shows that an American base is never just a military base. In the Philippines, in 1991, the Senate rejected the renewal of the agreement that kept United States bases, and American forces left the territory the following year. Decades later, Manila once again expanded American military access in response to China's advances in the South China Sea and the tensions near Taiwan. In South Korea, the American presence also became a permanent financial agreement, with Seoul agreeing to increase its contribution to support United States troops. These examples show that the American military presence always mixes security, money, sovereignty, and dependence. When Washington leaves, a void appears. Now, the next step is to see if the German withdrawal moves forward within the expected time frame and if Trump turns the threat against Italy and Spain into a concrete order. If that happens, Europe will definitely lose the support that has sustained its security for decades, and it will be the perfect scenario for Putin. This is Milson Alves News, and my purpose is to keep you well informed with the truth every day. The news links are in the video description. Leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and at the end check out the comments so you can be even more engaged with the community. Milson Alves.